Well, I think that the useful thing about Trump is that he can package the dismantling of American empire as the building of American empire. That's what he's doing. Because you have to sell to your demographic. And Americans are not the most mature, the most realistic, the most responsible people in the world, the most well acquainted with history and so forth. So you cannot possibly sell America's necessary downsizing and the managed erosion of America and the hollowing out of America as, we've made a lot of bad choices for a very long time. We've only ever really made short-term plans for the future. So it turns out that there's a lot of unavoidable, necessary changes that have to be made at your expense. You can't really sell that to the American public. You can't tell the American public that consequences are a thing. That demographic of political consumers simply cannot compute a message like that. Because look, what Trump is going to do, what he is doing, and what he will do, uh, these are all things that were going to happen anyway, with or without him. He's just the one who's selling it to you as a good thing. That's his job. He's like the guy at a company who's designated as the one to deliver the bad news to you that you're going to be let go. And you designate him for that job because he has a way of presenting it to you. He has a way of presenting to you you being fired as the greatest opportunity of your life, all the new horizons that you're going to be able to pursue and so on. That's Trump. That's Trump's job. America has been stuffing balloons up their sleeves for a very long time and telling everyone that they're muscles. But now even the balloons are deflating. The great American hoax is over. And Trump is there to oversee the dismembering of American empire. The US is going to be isolated, it's going to withdraw, and it's going to be non-competitive globally. And like I said, this is all unavoidable. This would have happened with or without Trump. You've simply come to the end of your life cycle as a hegemonic superpower. And the decay and the decomposition that will follow is just part of the natural process. Trump can't be blamed for that, and he can't be given credit for any of this. But his job is to make you think that none of it's happening, even while it's happening right in front of your face. This is what Trump's main job is. Because look, for example, drill, baby, drill, right? Make America energy self-sufficient, et cetera, et cetera. Fire up all of the dormant oil wells and so forth in West Texas and so on, while simultaneously asking OPEC to lower oil prices, which of course means asking OPEC to increase production. Okay. The way that goes is increase production by OPEC, and if they do it by the US as well, okay, then the oil price drops, and cheap oil floods the market, out of sync with demand, driving the price down even further. Now the price is too low for it to even be profitable for American producers to drill, to refine, or to extract. Do you understand? American oil producers need for oil to be at a minimum of $40 per barrel for it to even be worth it. For it to even be worth it to drill and extract and refine and so forth. Meanwhile, OPEC can still make a profit at just $10 a barrel. So you understand, America cannot play the oil game with OPEC. OPEC has the capacity to ramp up oil production if they want to, anytime they want to. They can ramp up oil production. They can increase production to a level within just 90 days that America couldn't reach even in 5 years. In other words, OPEC can decimate the American oil and gas sector anytime they want. The only reason they don't do that is because they want to maintain price stability for their own benefit, for their own reasons. They would rather have oil at $70 a barrel or $100 a barrel rather than $10 a barrel. So they choose to allow America to stay in the game. And that's the only reason. But if you're going to ramp up oil production on your end, well, then you better hope that OPEC responds by cutting production on their end just to stabilize the price. Because if they don't, if they respond in kind and they do what you do, and they also ramp up oil production, and then they drive the price of oil down to their minimum profit level, well, that will nuke America's whole oil industry. Plants, drilling sites, refineries, all of that's going to shut down. Tens of thousands of jobs will just disappear overnight. And for every one job in the oil and gas sector, there's at least 2 or 3 jobs that are indirectly related to that. So you were looking at potentially hundreds of thousands of jobs lost by drill, baby, drill. Not to mention, when that happens, no one in the private sector is going to invest in the oil sector anymore. So you see, no more exports to Europe, no more exports anywhere, no more oil exports, energy exports. Meanwhile, you're going to abandon renewable energy, clean energy, and so on. The Green New Scam, as Trump says, he's very much against that. And at the same time, you have the UAE and you have Saudi Arabia investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S. In energy-intensive businesses in the United States. I mean, Trump said it himself. If oil companies drill themselves out of business, I don't give a damn. That's what he said. So you see how the rhetoric, how the marketing actually sells the opposite of what the policy outcome is actually going to be. I don't think for a second that Trump doesn't know that. I think he knows that. No one who's putting these policies in place doesn't know what the outcomes will be. And that's why the policies are being pursued, because they want to achieve those outcomes, those very outcomes. But you can't sell that to the electorate. You can't tell the American people, we, your private sector overlords, are no longer tied to the success or the prosperity or the stability of the American economy. We have global interests, not national interests. And so we've decided to drive the U.S. into energy bankruptcy as quickly as possible. And maybe then we can sell all of America's oil and gas assets to Saudi Arabia or to China or what have you for pennies. You can't tell the American people that. So instead, you say, Trump says, we're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to drill, better, stronger, faster than anyone. We're going to produce more oil than anyone else in the world, and so on and so on and so on. We're number one, and everyone cheers. Everyone applauds while the oxygen is being drained from the room. And let me tell you, that's exactly what's going on. The last time Trump was in office, Saudi Arabia and Russia collaborated to flood the global oil market during COVID-19, no less. And the U.S., under Trump, the U.S., the media, portrayed this as a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. But it was transparently done. It was transparently undertaken by Russia and Saudi Arabia, specifically to undermine the American oil sector, the American oil industry. It completely crashed the oil price, making oil production completely unviable for the U.S., for U.S. producers, okay? Trump had good relations with Russia. He had good relations with Saudi Arabia, still does. And I think it's fair to say that this was a three-way collaboration, not just between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Trump was involved. And now Trump already wants to do it again within his first week in office. I don't think OPEC is going to go along with it, to be honest. Not right now. Why should they? You said drill, baby, drill, so you go ahead and do that. You go ahead. You drill. But we are not going to initiate a crash in the oil price. We need the money right now. We have projects. So you have to take Trump seriously, but never at his word. Never take him literally. But do take him seriously, because he's a mascot for a faction of power that needs to be taken very seriously. The A-National OCGFC, owners and controllers of global financialized capital. They're essentially the real unipolar superpower of the world. And Trump is their hatchet man in America. Now, generally speaking, this is going to be very good for the Muslim world. Generally speaking, it's going to be good for the Muslim world and the global South more broadly. Yes, it is. But I know that things are going to get very hard for you in the U.S. Things are going to get very hard for you in the West overall. Now, most people around the world, in the global South, they'll react to that news the same way that someone would react to hearing about a serial killer getting shanked in prison. He had it coming. That's how most people feel, to be honest. But I know that most people in the West already have it hard. I know that most people in the West are actually already suffering. And I know what it's like to live in America. It's not easy. And I know that just because the consequences that you may suffer may be the result of your own actions, that doesn't make the consequences any easier to endure. I know it's going to be hard, especially when you're suffering the consequences of actions that were taken by your elites, not necessarily the actions of the common people. So I know this is hard to take, and it's going to be hard to take. Now, again, let me reiterate, this is not about Trump. It's not about Trump. The isolation, the degradation of America was going to happen anyway. It had to happen. This is just the necessary course of the logic of Western predatory capitalism. Just like Gorbachev wasn't really the one who destroyed the Soviet Union, he just oversaw the inevitable destruction, self-destruction of the Soviet Union because it had run its course. America has run its course. And when I say Western predatory capitalism, those adjectives are important because it's not even really about capitalism in and of itself. It really mostly has to do with the culture and the civilizational peculiarities of the West. They don't act like that because of capitalism. Their capitalism acts like this because of the way they are. You understand? And in fact, it's because of the way they are. In fact, it's because of the way they are that they even approach capitalism, trade, and so forth, and business the way they do, their particular version of capitalism. And it's because of them and because of the way they are, and because of their approach to capitalism, that the A national OCGFC even are a thing. And it's also because of this that their own societies are now on the chopping block. It's because of the way they are. But that's a topic for another day. The point is, this is something that has to happen. It's something that has to happen. It's something that had to happen. It's something that will happen, and it's going to happen, no matter what. No matter whether it's Trump or anyone else. Anyone who says, for example, well, that's what you get for voting for Trump, or you should have voted for Harris. Well, I mean, you're so thoroughly indoctrinated and participating in the deception and the deflection of that system that you yourself are just as much a cause for the collapse of the United States as anyone else that you blame for it. You created a class of national elites, oligarchical elites, whose private profit interests are no longer connected to your own economy. You did that. They're not connected to any productive activity. They're not connected to any nationality. They're not connected to your standard of living, not to your stability, not to your safety, your prosperity, your success as a nation, or anything. And that class of private sector powers became essentially a nation unto themselves, like I've said many times. A nation that transcends borders. It transcends national interests. They don't have any interests except their own interests. You created that, and you celebrated that, in fact. You still celebrate it, never realizing that they would inevitably sacrifice you for their own profit interests, the same way that they've sacrificed millions of people outside your country. You created this psychopathic class of predators. And you expected them to never bite the hand that feeds them, even though the hand that feeds them has always been feeding them hands. Now they can't tell the difference between the food and the feeder anymore. It's all just flesh to them. You can't raise a wolf on human flesh and expect him to distinguish between the human you are feeding him from the human who is feeding him. Eventually, he doesn't see you as his master or his owner anymore. He only sees you as food. Well, you raised a wolf on the flesh of the global south, and it turns out you taste just the same. Yes, wolves don't care if it's dark meat or light meat. They'll chew you up either way. Look, for decades, the military-industrial complex, the MIC, in America, it was a towering giant in America, in the U.S. It was the driver of the economy. They shaped policies at home and abroad. But today, there's a decline in its dominance, and that's been coming for a while. It's no longer the sole engine of the American economy. It's no longer the most important engine of the economy or the global economy. Now, this change wasn't due to any great moral awakening or some newfound sense of conscience. No, it's the result of systemic shifts within the American economy, popular fatigue over endless wars, corruption and fraud within the military-industrial complex, and of course the rise of the national OCGFC. The U.S. economy has diversified. I mean, decades ago, in the 50s, say, weapons and military technology was central for America's economic growth. But today, other industries, technology, finance, obviously healthcare, and so on, it surpasses that. And of course, globalization shifted the focus from building tanks and jets to dominating digital platforms, international markets, and so on. Then came the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was the big shift when the Soviet Union collapsed. Then the supposed existential threat that justified the immense military budgets and spending and so on, that disappeared. That threat disappeared. I mean, you tried to come up with new threats, terrorism, war on drugs, what have you, but none of these threats really could justify the scale of investment that was needed to keep the military-industrial complex, influential. And like I said, the public became tired of wars in the 2000s. Iraq, Afghanistan, it drained the American public, emotionally, financially, politically, and people began to question the wisdom of pouring trillions and trillions of dollars into conflicts that only ever resulted in spreading chaos and destruction. Not to mention, you have rampant fraud and corruption in the military-industrial complex. You have overcharging, you have magically disappearing funds, that were handed over to defense contractors. They've misplaced enough money. The military-industrial complex, defense contractors, have misplaced enough money to house every homeless person in America and educate every child. They charge so much for one weapon that China could probably build a dozen for the same price. I mean, if the military-industrial complex has been the vehicle that carried the American economy, well, it sure isn't a fuel-efficient vehicle. It's a gas guzzler. And of course, you can barely get anyone anymore in America, young people, what have you, who are willing to put on a uniform and fight for this money laundering scam. That's all it is. That's all it is at this point. I mean, you want to send your sons and your daughters to go die in a foreign country for Raytheon? That's what they're doing. They're not fighting for democracy. They're fighting for General Dynamics. Well, nobody wants to do that. How are you going to convince anyone that they're fighting for democracy 6,000 miles away from their own crumbling neighborhood in New York, and their neighborhood is crumbling because all of their tax money is going to Lockheed Martin? You can't convince people to fight for that. You can't. So then, because your pool of soldiers is shrinking, then you have to start changing your approach to killing and carnage. You have to start changing your means of destruction, because you can't really do traditional warfare anymore. You had to develop new technologies, which means that the demand for conventional weapon systems, which the military-industrial complex was based upon, that's given way to focus on drones and cyber capabilities and artificial intelligence and so on and so on and so on. So the MIC hasn't disappeared, but its form and its scale has changed. And part of that, too, is because America started moving manufacturing overseas, globalization and so on. And in order for the military-industrial complex to really maintain its importance, well, domestic manufacturing was key. Domestic manufacturing was key. But pretty soon, more and more companies were keeping their toothbrushes and their shampoo in somebody else's house. And you know what that means. America went from being the wife of corporations to being the side chick. See, again, because you had to change how you go about killing people, rather than learning how to get along with people, you had to come up with new technology. And that new technology depends upon electronics, which means rare earths. Well, we're talking about private corporations, talking about profit-driven corporations. So all they care about is money. All they care about is low-cost acquisition. And China flooded the market with cheap rare earths, which caused the market price to plummet. And that put rare earths mines out of business. You see how that works? Just like I was talking about with oil. So now China controls about 80% of the world's rare earths market and 90% of the processing. Think about that. The American military is completely dependent upon Chinese rare earths. You talk about confronting China, but they can shut you down in 3 seconds if they want to. This is what I mean. You literally created this situation for yourselves, and it has nothing to do but play out now. It's inevitable course. It has to just play out. You gave private enterprise absolute autonomy, absolute supremacy, and that included sectors within the military-industrial complex. Your MIC-driven ideological obsession with the Soviets led you to engage with China, and then China opened up, and then you very quickly became dependent upon them. And they have surpassed you to a stunning degree in manufacturing and in technology. And now you can't even make a drone without China. You can't even make a drone. And you need drones because you don't have soldiers. You see? You've been doing nothing for decades now but cultivate your own demise. It's really quite poetic in a way. And in this whole process, like I said, you're rich, your companies, your elites, are increasingly untethered from your national interests. And now they're floating above the stratosphere, the stratosphere of global financialized capital, and they're looking down and they see America as just another landmass, just another population to be pillaged. And so as the MIC recedes, other factions have risen in prominence. At the forefront, of course, is big tech, which emerged from the military-industrial complex, companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, and so on. These aren't just businesses anymore. Those are oligarchical political powers. They dominate global markets. They shape cultures. They influence politics. They influence politics in ways that the MIC never could even have dreamt of. I mean, they control the flow of information. They control communication. They're gatekeepers of knowledge and power now. They're massive. And then there's, of course, financialization. This is very important. The financial sector not only shapes economic policy, but it exerts immense political influence as well. I mean, the 2008 financial crisis showed us that Wall Street's too big to fail. And since 2008, their grip has only expanded and tightened. I mean, even those tech giants, Google, Apple, and so on, a huge amount of their wealth is actually due to financialization, not sales, not ad revenues. It's through financialization. It's basically fake money. Then, of course, there's the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sectors. Big pharma, it's massive, and obviously incredibly influential politically, as we all saw during COVID. Okay, these are all a-national, along with things like construction and mining and so on. subcategories. And they're all corralled together. All of these diverse business interests, they're all corralled together in asset management firms like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard. Those three companies constitute what you could call universal owners. They don't operate according to any one country's interests. They don't operate according to any one company's interests. They operate according to the combined interests of international economic sectors. They're the first C in the OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. They're the controllers on behalf of the owners of capital. And they have the reach, and they have the portfolios, and they have the power to coordinate and to orchestrate economic planning across the globe on behalf of the vast array of investors. They control literally trillions of dollars. And they're connected to sovereign wealth funds around the world that gives them influence and access to trillions more. They dwarf the military-industrial complex in this regard, particularly since the primary source of money for the military-industrial complex is the American government, which is extremely constraining for them. That's very limiting for them. Asset management companies, they don't have that restriction. So yes, this is the faction that Trump represents. And you'll see that all of his policies serve that faction. I've said this before. You have to look past all of the MAGA rhetoric, all of the nationalist rhetoric, because all of that is all just a camouflage for what will be the shrinkage of America on the global stage and what will be the ransacking of the U.S. economy. It's like if a snake oil salesman was selling cyanide instead of snake oil. That's what Trump is doing. Like, for example, okay, I've already talked about how his energy policy, how that puts the U.S. on a path to energy bankruptcy, not self-sufficiency. And it will only strengthen OPEC, by the way. But also look at withdrawing from the WHO. Okay, American pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers, insurance companies, and so on, they're expressing concern and disapproval for what he did, for pulling out of the WHO. But who benefits from that? The beneficiaries are going to be all of the so-called emerging economies, emerging markets, and their healthcare providers, their pharmaceutical companies, their insurers, and so forth. They're hindered right now by patent protections, by regulatory restrictions, and policies against, especially against generic drug production and so on. India and China, for example. This is very important for them. So this is actually the sidelining of America. And of course, the same is true, of course, obviously, with tariffs. You know, basically everything that Trump proposes or promises or wants to do, all of it amounts to shutting America off from the world and directing everybody elsewhere, you know, telling all business to go elsewhere. The only place he approaches with open hostility, you know, from a policy point of view, the only place he approaches with any hostility is Europe and other Western countries, other allies. I mean, he might be serious about trying to take control of the Panama Canal. He might be serious about that. But I think that mostly has to do with just confirming that America is only going to be interested in having influence in the Western Hemisphere, in the global North. But I mean, even that, okay, even that, when you weigh the costs of maintenance of the Panama Canal, management, staff, security, and so forth, repairs, and on and on, everything that America would have to spend in order to control the Panama Canal, well, the net profit is barely going to be $1 billion annually. That's assuming that the trade flows through the Panama Canal remain as they are, which, given Trump's obsession with tariffs and his obsession with alienating global business from doing business with America, it seems likely that trade through the Panama Canal will actually decrease. So frankly, taking control of the Panama Canal will most likely end up costing America considerably more than they'll ever profit from it. It's the same with Greenland, really. You know, I mean, given how disruptive and how alienating it would be for America to actually force Denmark to sell them Greenland, you know, plus the amount of investment that they would have to put in, the initial cost and the investment and taking over services and so on inside of Greenland. Even with Greenland's natural resources, the U.S., I think, would be lucky to break even. I mean, that's if we take it seriously in the first place. Like I said, nothing Trump says should ever be taken at face value. He never means anything that he says. His public positions are always either bargaining tactics or just sheer misdirections. Both Panama and Greenland, and the idea of Canada becoming an American state. All of these are just moves, in my opinion, to try to estrange allies and isolate the U.S. as much as possible. That's what I think he's doing. And I think that that is the desired outcome. That's the real desired outcome, which is why I think it's a serious mistake to ever think that any politician's rhetoric about why a policy is being pursued is the actual reason the policy is being pursued, whether it's Trump or anyone else. It's not. This isn't unique to Trump, because you always have people saying that, like, even analysts. Well, that policy didn't work out as planned. Wow, that really backfired, and so on, because the outcome was not the outcome that was outlined by the original rhetoric. No, the outcome was exactly as desired. The rhetoric was the lie. It seems like this should be a basic understanding that people should have. Yet you have people, like I said, even analysts, saying, like, for example, the sanctions against Russia appear to have backfired. They seem to have actually hurt Europe more than Russia. Who knew? Of course they hurt Europe more than Russia. That was obvious. And that was the intention all along. You know, this is especially true when the outcome is predictable, and especially true when the outcome is actually predicted. When you have a predictable and predicted outcome, when that occurs, you should obviously deduce that that was the goal from the outstart. But the negative policy outcome, the desired negative policy outcome, is never going to be stated as the desired outcome, obviously. Like I said, you can't sell that to the public. So, for example, with the oil thing, Trump can say that he wants the price of oil to be reduced in order to cripple Russia. But when a reduced oil price actually cripples American oil producers, and predictably so, well, that was the whole point of the policy. And it isn't the policymakers who are foolish. You're the fool for believing their rhetoric and for thinking that somehow the predictable and predicted outcome won't occur. So like I said, Trump, for example, is not anti-China. Putting tariffs on Chinese goods is anti-American, not anti-China. But again, this isn't about Trump. I don't want to keep making it about Trump. The containment of America was always going to happen, like I said. And in fact, it's been happening, incrementally, gradually. It's been happening for quite some time. But the process is accelerating. But nothing was ever going to prevent it, in reality. I mean, the rise of Brics is not an uprising. This has to be understood. It's a relative rise being facilitated by the A-National OCGFC through several strategies, which includes deliberately expediting America's decline. This is not a revolution, it's a transition. And it is a managed transition. The sort of leftist, anti-imperialist rhetoric on the issue of Brics is inaccurate to some extent, I think. And I think it's crucial for us to understand this properly. Multipolarity would be great if a private sector unipolar power did not exist, but it does. And multipolarity and national sovereignty means something very different to that unipolar superpower than it does to the nations of the global south. To the BlackRocks of the world, to the state streets and so on, multipolarity and national sovereignty means compartmentalized, vulnerable countries, most of whom have national economies that are a fraction of BlackRock's assets, meaning they are susceptible to coercion, they're susceptible to bribery, manipulation, and exploitation. Yes, the A-National OCGFC are just as vicious and just as predatory as the nationalistic OCGFC. They don't care about Brics. They don't care about the global south. They care about market domination. That's all. And it just so happens that the global south is the most important market of the 21st century. They're not coming to help us. They're coming to help themselves. And everyone should be very clear about that. And that's why I think that no one should ever talk about multipolarity without also talking at the same time about solidarity. And you shouldn't even talk about pan-Arabism or pan-Africanism or pan-Islamism or anything like that. You should only talk about pan-Southism, if anything, because the entire global south needs to work together, from Chile to Indonesia, from Saudi Arabia to South Africa, from Brunei to Belize. Okay, regional blocks, sure. ASEAN, the Arab League, the OIC, the African Union, the OAS, and so on. Yes. But all of these blocks need to be linked together. They need to be linked together, they need to coordinate, and they need to fortify each other. And we have to have protections against the very OCGFC whom we are partnering with, because even though it is necessary to partner with them, and it is strategic to partner with them, they're like Banu al-Nadir. They're like Banu Qurayza. They're like Abdullah bin Ubay. When they smile at us, it's not because they're happy to see us, it's because they're getting ready to bite. They'll pat you on the back just to practice stabbing you there. All they're waiting for is the opportunity. This is another practical reason, aside from the religious imperative, there's another practical reason for supporting and backing up our rulers, backing up our governments in the Muslim world. Because if they fall, if our governments fall, if they get toppled, or if they get destabilized by internal unrest and strife and so on, well, the A National OCGFC will just turn Brics into a new platform for colonization and subjugation. And that glimmer of hope that we're all seeing right now for real independence, for real sovereignty, and for the potential of a systemic global change in the economy and politics and so on, that'll get snuffed out. We're wrestling right now for control over the Brics project to make it truly what we all hope it is, or what we hope it can be, what we know it can be. And the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, they're doing their best, and they're going to do their best to try to shatter that, believe me. Not so that they can keep the West on top. They don't care about keeping the West on top, but they want to make sure that they themselves are on top of the West and the global South. This again is why I keep emphasizing the importance, the grave importance of solidarity between the rank and file, average, struggling people in the West, the struggling people of America, the so-called minorities in America, the members of the global majority who live in America. The need for solidarity between them and the people of the global South, between them and the people of the Muslim world, because we've been colonized, and you're going to be colonized. And our struggle against colonization isn't over here. It's not over. It's just in a new phase. You know, we've made it across the battlefield, but now we're making our way through a minefield. You know, over there in America, in the West, you're going to turn into a battlefield. That's the stage that you're at now. Our history with the West is going to repeat itself in the West. You know, you're like an old predator who has become prey for his own offspring. Like I said, they're coming to you, your offspring is coming to you, and you think that there's still some familial affection between you. So you're glad to see them. And you think it's going to be like the old days when you used to hunt together. That's the way Trump is selling it to you. Because selling it to you that way is his whole job. But they're coming to hunt you, not to hunt with you. So you need solidarity with the global South. And as I've said before, especially about African Americans, but really it applies to all so-called minority groups in America. And in fact, it applies to every so-called race and so-called ethnicity in America who are struggling economically. You know, you live really, in reality, you live just the same. You struggle just the same as the people of the global South. You know, 22% of Americans are barely covering their basic needs. And 65% of Americans, low-income Americans, they're in a constant state of worry and a constant state of anxiety about being able to pay their bills, their necessary bills. At least 10% of Americans are in persistent poverty. So low-income, struggling, working-class populations living in America, if they were their own country, they would apply for Brics. They would apply to join Brics, you know. If your situation was your citizenship, for tens of millions of Americans, you would be living in a developing country if your situation was your citizenship. And I'm telling you, only your situation actually matters. They want your citizenship to make you forget about the situation that you're in, the situation that the country of your citizenship put you in. They want you to forget that you're poor, just by telling you that you live in the richest country on earth. Never mind that the country doesn't have riches. It has some rich people in the country, but increasingly, even those rich people don't identify with the country itself anymore. And Donald Trump is just one of those rich people. I'm telling you, millionaires and billionaires ought to be regarded as foreigners. They ought to be regarded as foreigners in America and everywhere else. Or they shouldn't even be allowed to hold office, in my opinion, because they actually belong to a different nation than the rest of the people. They truly do. They belong to the nation of wealth. They're a-national. They have nothing in common with you and I. I mean, how many of those celebrities whose mansions were burned down in Hollywood, how many of those people are in shelters right now? How many of them are even homeless at all? I mean, what would you do if your house burned down, if your home burned down? Do you have a helicopter that will whisk you away to your other home? You understand what I'm saying? These are people who have no stake whatsoever in your and my well-being. They have no stake in the well-being of the economy of the country. They have no stake in that because they've got theirs. They're covered. They've got theirs. It doesn't matter to them one way or the other what happens to America. It truly doesn't. And they're going to sell you out. They're going to sacrifice you, you know. The ship is sinking and they're already on the life rafts on their way to Dubai. You know, somebody said with the mass deportations Trump is doing, that that's going to leave all of these manual labor jobs without workers. Well, who do you think is going to do that work now? Who do you think is going to have to do all of those jobs that migrant workers have been doing for next to nothing? It's you. It's you. That's the new gig economy. Picking fruit, washing dishes, cleaning hotel rooms, day labor, landscaping. Oh, did you think that they were telling you that you don't need college or that college is pointless because of neo-Marxist postmodernism and critical race theory? Is that what you thought? Turns out it was because they didn't want you to be overqualified to pick oranges. They didn't want you to think that you were too good to work at a warehouse. They didn't want you to assume that you could make a livable income on just one job instead of two or three. See, the people on the upper decks of the ship, they know that the ship is sinking long before the people in the steerage, and they have first access to those lifeboats. So the elites have known for quite some time that America is going under, and they've already made their plans. They've already made their arrangements, and they made very different arrangements for you. You've been slotted to go down with the ship. That's in America, and it's in Europe as well. And some of you have actually allowed yourselves to believe, you know, when you see the people rowing away in the life rafts, you believe when they tell you that you'll be safer, you'll be safe from the flood, you'll be safe from drowning if you stay in the belly of that ship. I told you, you'll have to always read them backwards. Always play them in reverse. You have to play them in reverse. And then you'll know what they're really saying. Here, we'll practice. Make America great again.